Hi, everybody. My name is Tanya Pizitny, and I'm the Interim Director of Quality here at GitLab. Welcome to our 1312 Retro. Thank you all for joining. So as usual, we'll run through the following four general sections of this retro. We'll touch base on previous retrospective improvement tasks. We have two discussion topics, so we'll spend some time there. We'll talk about the improvements that we'll track for the next release, and then we'll wrap up. So to dive right in, the previous retrospective improvement tasks, Donald, if you're here, you have the first one.
Hello. Okay, so in 1311, the team had a few high priority issues that came in. We wanted to improve the clarity of what engineers should do if they are asked to work on one or more of these issues at the same time. I was a little delayed, got an MR out though to define that process kind of within the plan section in the handbook. Once that's merged, we'll review the P1s and S1s that come in, see if defining the process helped. I'll actually keep this as an improvement to track for the next milestone. And after reviewing the P1 to S1 that came in, we can determine if it makes sense to add this process to more of a global scale, again, in the next milestone. On to Nick.
Yeah, so a couple of retrospectives ago, we did an audit about multi-version compatibility issues. And then from that, we opened an issue to plan a lightweight training to raise awareness about compatibility issues. So we've gathered some more resources and we've opened an MR for the training issue template. I think that's pretty close to being ready to put into review. We want to just create a short quiz to test for understanding of the content. Mike Kazono has opened an MR to improve the multi-version compatibility docs page, and I think it has renamed that to or sort of rephrase that or to backwards compatibility. So I think that's kind of the term we want to use more going forward. John Hope has also volunteered to try out the first iteration of this training with his team once it's ready. So just want to thank both of them for their support on this. And I think we can also move this forward to next retro to track progress as well.
Great, thank you both. So I don't think Dan can attend due to time zone, so I'll vocalize his for him. So we had a follow-up item for him to track quad planning updates to include tracking cross-group dependencies and quality risk mapping. And his update is that the cross-group dependencies were reviewed during quad planning, and they found that they weren't consistently using the right label. So they're iterating on the process to add that label during their quad planning meeting where it's missing. And then the next task is mine as retrospective moderator. So we wanted to try to improve the retrospective participation. So a couple of things that we tried were socializing requests in Eng Manager's channel rather than development to get straight at the people who are asked to participate. Advertising the discussion topics a couple of days in advance so that people had time to mull them over. And then encouraging each individual group to identify a single action item to roll up so that we could learn from each other and try to identify general themes. So those action items were tried. We did see some uptick in engagement, and specifically we saw discussion topics proposed, which is fantastic. And we also saw more groups contribute to ways that we can improve. I did receive some more suggestions from engineering managers that might help further, so we'll continue to track this for the next retrospective and see if we can continue to drive more value. Great, so we're on to the discussion topic. So the first one is from Dan. Are you here, Dan? No, okay, I'll vocalize. So in Manage Optimize, they decided to start adding a block and code MR on every release post item MR to prevent release post items from being merged before the feature is available. So generally they use a feature flag rollout MR as the blocking MR, and they added that as a suggestion to the release post item template. So the discussion here is, does anyone have feedback on that method? And does anybody have other ways that they ensure that the release post is accurate?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and verbalize my point. Yeah, I tried this with a couple of our release posts, or last MR, last milestone. And I did find it helpful. One issue I see is that I think we're supposed to wait until the MRs have hit production technically before merging the release posts. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think that so this method will let you know when the MR has been merged, and kind of gives you an indicator to look and see if the release post item is ready. But I think if we're supposed to be waiting for the MR to hit production, we still don't. We still have to kind of check in and check on the status of the MR before merging the release post item.
Christopher, you want to vocalize?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask was, I guess one thing I was thinking about is like the one thing I don't like about this part of the process is that, you know, it involves human interaction where it's like, okay, you got to do like bookkeeping and basically keep kind of track of these things and then merge them. So you can't do them for a lot of, you know, like if we do this at scale, like you can't do this for a lot of things, right? It's only for like feature flag related specific to release posts, which still feels pretty weighty given the number of release post ads we have in a given release. So I guess the question is do you think this is a case where we'd want to automate this, or like Nick, I'd be curious in feedback of, you know, like would you rather have, like, do you have that satisfaction of like, okay, now I go click the merge for merging the release post, or do you feel like, you know, like either once it gets tagged with production, do we just immediately merge the other MR, or what do people feel about that?
Yeah, we are up for automating boring things. I think forcing people to do it manually helps light the passion to automate them. So I think I would look at this as a interim state. I also want to hear feedback from product if this is actually helpful in the overall release post efficiency. Are we doing this and it's getting results to them, or is this something that's more of an experiment that we could turn off in the future as well? I think that we would need some line of sight there. But yeah, overall, I'm fully supportive of automating all the things that are boring and mundane. I think the production label is a good thing, because if it has a production, it means it's live in production, and that is you can merge it into the release post.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be an improvement if you can sort of tie that to, yeah, not just an MR being merged, but what stage or environment it's in. So maybe that's a potential feature request for our MR page if that's not already an issue. But I do, yeah, there's still, yeah, I don't know if it catches all the cases like you're saying, Christopher, because I think like in Geo specifically, sometimes we're creating release post items, not necessarily based on MRs being merged, but certain things having been validated and tested and confirmed working with some interaction with Geo and other components. So in that case, this wouldn't work, but I think it would help with probably a lot of the cases that we're looking at.
Nick, would it be okay if we put this as a improvement to track, whether it's you or me, to report back? Would that work for you? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Sam, do you want to vocalize?
Yeah, just a comment I got from another team, Cheryl Lee in Verify was the one who brought this up to me. But I thought it was a good point. It was about all the rapid action work that we've done and whether or not, kind of in hindsight, some of that should have been captured in release posts. I think we got some feedback from some customers that the last release was less impressive because we were more focused on other things. And that all those performance improvements potentially would be, you know, noteworthy. And so that came out there, and it just made me think in terms of this conversation that, you know, the more we can reduce the overhead of that process, you know, then the easier it is to highlight various things that customers might be interested in. But, you know, the more toil involved, I think the less likely people have the bandwidth or, you know, wherewithal to do it.
And Nick and Tanya, just a question to improve my stupidity. Is the current process now falling on the EMs to make sure everything in the release post items are correct. Is that where okay, got it. So then, yeah, I think we want to automate this because it does help efficiency overall.
Yeah, and to your point, I think you were asking before about products role in this, and I think this is more on the after, say, the PM has created the release posts and gotten it approved and everything. This is specifically the part where the EM is responsible for merging.
Got it. Got it. So it's now us to make sure that's correct. Got it. Okay. So I'll take a step back on asking feedback from product workflow because I think it's us now that we need to be responsible for making sure it's accurate. Okay.
Sam, I don't know if it was this release or the previous release, but I think it was Stan and I were having a conversation about it, and he noticed that we had a whole bunch of the query improvements kind of listed in the release notes. That could have been 2 releases ago, though. So some of that work did get captured in release posts, though maybe not as crisp as you would like from that perspective.
Maybe, yeah. And it's just really based on, feedback from that one team's retrospective. So I think that, there are things that, probably could have been highlighted more, but I don't have any real specifics. I just wanted to pass the comment along.
Yeah, it sounds like we could do a better job there, certainly to talk about, how are we improving the product. That isn't necessarily always. The challenge with the release post is it's really like, also a marketing and visibility. So like if we put too much content in there, then it kind of misses message too. So there's like this balance that we play.
Yeah. I think with performance improvements also, you can't always tell the impact of them until you've had a little time to measure it. So that could also be a challenge there of like, how do we know what the impact is exactly?
All right, great. So I'll create an issue to discuss this further and to try to set automation in place. We can figure out the balance and discuss that further there. Excellent. So it's time to move on to the next discussion topic. And I don't think that Phil is here due to time zones, so I'll vocalize. So the data replication lag made it harder to track changes to KPIs. And on a positive note, it was resolved as of May 24th. So that's great. But we're wondering if there are ways to track KPI changes, even if our main source of data is down. If anybody has any tips for making the most informed decisions possible, even with incomplete data, and just kind of wondering how other EMs and PMs handled the visibility gap.
There was one instance where we were looking at Grafana to do some similar things. This was mostly around CI abuse, like CI minutes usage. And so that can be tracked in Grafana as well as in Sisense. But I will say there was actually some data inconsistencies there that kind of got a little tricky to understand. But the real-time monitoring information sometimes can maybe be a proxy.
Jerome, do you want to vocalize? We could take notes for you.
Yeah, so I pasted in a quick demo video from Chase, which he shared with me a few weeks ago, where he had built a workaround where instead of waiting for the data to come through the data pipeline into the Snowflake data warehouse, he actually used, I believe it was like an admin token with Google Sheet macro, where it would pull in MRs into this Google Sheet, so that he'd be able to still track on the MRs which his team was working on. So that was an interesting sort of script that he put together.
Very scrappy. Does it make sense for us to maybe document these secondary sources? We'd obviously like to rely on a single source of truth that's stable, but things happen and things go down. Would it make sense to have a document somewhere in the handbook saying here are the alternative ways that you can get this data?
I think so. I hate to say it, but every time I've said, "Oh, the system is going to be reliable, we don't have to worry about this," invariably it breaks. Not at GitLab specifically, it's just industry experience, right? Murphy's Law at its best.
I guess you'd have to do that per data source, really, because one of the benefits is, pulls all different types of data together. So Is that kind of what you're thinking, Tanya?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't want us to rely on these as our primary. SciSense should be the primary and it should be up, but things happen invariably, Christopher, as you said. So being able to still do business as usual while waiting for fixes would be helpful, I think. Mike, do you want to vocalize?
Thank you. So when we say changes to the KPIs, are we talking about editing of the KPI definition or new KPIs, or just the movements within that KPI? Okay.
The latter, yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else have any tips or tricks or clever workarounds that they used while our data was unavailable?
Recently, when monitoring pipeline abuse, we started relying pretty heavily on Kibana. So similar to Grafana, setting up alerting, setting up dashboards there. So just another data source that we can use.
Okay, anything else to add there?
Maybe just one thought occurred to me, that thinking about like the urgency of the data could be another useful thing. And it might be difficult to like document alternative sources and processes for every type of data, but if it's like data that we need on like a, hourly or daily, cadence to be able to, continue, like that would be probably pretty important. If it's something that, after a month or two would become a problem, then maybe less important because we'd have time to, respond.
Yeah, that's a great point. That really will help with prioritization too for filling this page out. Awesome. Okay, so moving on to improvements to track for our next release. There are more here than we'll verbalize because of the instructions for people to fill in things here so we can compare notes. So Christopher, you have the first one. Christopher Baus, if you're here. Nope. Okay, I'll vocalize. So the changes in direction for the rapid action for crypto mining pipeline abuse was really stressful for the team. So the plan there is to get improvement actions from a dedicated retrospective on the project for that specifically. The next one is mine. So in the quality retrospective, we noted that when packaging QA fails in an MR, it takes a lot of work to dig into the details of the failure because the resources to debug are all not in one place. So we want to improve this by aggregating the results into a single report. So it's much easier to get a glimpse of what's going on. The next one is me as well as retrospective moderator. So we should continue to try to improve the retrospective participation. Several of the suggestions I received after the last retro, and thank you to everybody who reached out to me. They were around pulling in folks from across the org to help shed light into the why behind what we're doing. So I'll make an effort to get something set up there. Next one, Donald, number 8.
Yeah, actually, I think number 7 is the one that should be bolded. I'll fix that. There was a comment in our team retro about our team retros aren't opened up until like right after the milestone, where a lot of times, we're doing work throughout the milestone and we complete things earlier on in a milestone. But then since the retro isn't open till after, sometimes we forget to include it in the retro. So the proposal is to go ahead and just create, even if it's just like a boilerplate or a template, but create the team retros right when milestone starts. That way people can just put their notes or comments in there right away. So all the teams, I think, or most of the teams that use the async retro use that project. So it would change the date for everyone. I just want to make sure other teams are okay with that. So what I'll do is I'll create an MR and then I'll ping everyone. And if you have any objections, just comment in the MR. And then Tanya.
Yep, and the next two are ones that we previously discussed to Donald, for me to add clarity to the plans handbook page. And then the next one is to automate the release post MR merging and create an issue to discuss that further. Anything else we should track for the next release? It's not already been vocalized.
Just want to say that the agenda format has improved from last time, so thanks for that.
And we're ending ahead of time. Thank you everybody for your time and filling this out, and we'll see you again.